In the dry heart of the Sahel, where endless sand meets only rare and fleeting rain, no one would expect the future of Burkina Faso to be hidden inside the skin of a dragon fruit. But this year, something extraordinary happened. On the very first stormy morning of the rainy season, the skies above Ouagadougou roared with helicopters. Villagers watched in disbelief as sacks were opened midair, scattering thousands of tiny black seeds across the desert and grasslands below. At first, it looked absurd, seeds falling from the sky into soil long thought to be dead. Some called it a waste, a costly gamble in a nation still struggling to fund hospitals and schools. But to Captain Ibrahim Traoré, this was no stunt. It was a mission. A bold experiment in survival and sovereignty. 50 kilograms of dragon fruit seeds, released like living rain onto the barren lands of Burkina Faso. Why dragon fruit? Why not millet, sorghum, or maize, the traditional crops of the region? Traoré's answer carried both scientific wisdom and political strategy. Dragon fruit is not just any fruit, it's a cactus. It thrives in poor soils, survives scorching heat, and demands very little water. It is the fruit of resilience, a survivor in the harshest of climates. But more than survival, dragon fruit carries promise. Around the world, from Paris to Tokyo, it sells for premium prices. By planting it in the Sahel, Burkina Faso wouldn't just fight hunger, it could claim a place in global markets where Africa has long been absent. The timing was key. By scattering the seeds during the brief rainy season, Traoré harnessed the only gift the desert still offered, short but powerful bursts of rain. He knew most seeds would not make it. But in agriculture, survival is about numbers, not perfection. Even if only 10% sprouted, that would still mean tens of thousands of cactus plants growing across the savannas and desert edges. Some would grow into living fences, shielding villages from sandstorms. Others would flower, feeding bees and pollinators. And many would bear fruit, bright pink or yellow treasures, sweet and nourishing, feeding both people and wildlife. But behind this bold agricultural vision lay an even deeper political message. For decades, Burkina Faso's food security has been shaped by foreign aid, shipments of rice and grain, consultants with charts, dependency dressed as assistance. Traoré rejected this. To him, sovereignty meant not only feeding your people, but feeding them with pride. By choosing dragon fruit, a crop seen as exotic and luxurious abroad, he was sending a message to the world: we are not beggars for wheat. We are growers of treasures. Of course, critics were quick to attack. Ministers wondered why not spend the money on irrigation. Donors dismissed it as wasteful theatrics. Western media mocked it as a fruit stunt. But Traoré knew symbols matter as much as results. And the image of helicopters scattering life across the desert was itself a declaration, a promise that Burkina Faso's future would not be written by outsiders, but sown by its own hands. Burkina Faso's fight against drought would not be waged with pity, but with imagination. In villages across the Sahel, reactions to the seed drops were mixed, but undeniably curious. Children rushed into fields, scooping up fallen dragon fruit seeds and planting them near their huts. Elders, skeptical but respectful, wondered aloud if such fruits could ever grow in their land. At least he is trying something new, one farmer said. And that was the heart of Captain Ibrahim Traoré's strategy. Even if the experiment failed in the fields, it had already succeeded in the minds of his people. It proved that leadership could dare. That Burkina Faso could dream beyond hardship. But this was no blind gamble. Traoré had consulted agronomists, who confirmed dragon fruit's potential in dry zones. Pilot farms near Bobo Dioulasso had already shown results. With only minimal irrigation, cactus vines bore fruit within 2 to 3 years. Local farmers were trained in trellising methods and prepared to expand if the scattered seeds took root. Export routes had even been mapped out through Ghana's ports, making it possible for Burkina Faso's harvests to reach European and Asian markets. So why take to the skies? Why scatter seeds by helicopter rather than plant them by hand? The answer was both practical and political. Helicopter seeding was fast, covering thousands of hectares in just days. But it was also unforgettable. agriculture became spectacle. Photos of seeds raining down from the sky spread across social media with captions like "Seeds of Sovereignty" and "Burkina Faso plants hope from the sky." Within hours, the world was talking, whether to mock or to praise, no one could ignore it. Ecologically, the move carried brilliance. By spreading seeds across varied landscapes, Traore let nature decide where they would thrive, some landing in sandy plains, others in rocky cracks, others in low, moist valleys. Over time, these scattered seedlings could form green mosaics across Burkina Faso's harshest terrains, slowing desertification, feeding pollinators, shading the land, and eventually bearing fruit for both people and wildlife. The costs were enormous: chartered helicopters, imported seeds, training programs, all running into millions. But Traore saw the expense differently. He treated it as an investment in memory, in narrative. Donors had spent billions on aid projects that no one remembered. This spectacle, succeed or fail, would never be forgotten. And in geopolitics, memory itself is power. Leaders who dare are remembered, and remembered leaders attract partnerships. As the rain soaked the earth and the seeds sank into the soil, the world waited. Would dragon fruit vines rise where only thorns once grew? Would Burkina Faso shock the skeptics and export exotic fruits within a decade? No one could say. But one truth was undeniable: Traore had planted more than seeds. He had planted an idea. That Africa's destiny would not be dictated by drought, aid, or despair, but by imagination, courage, and sovereignty. Yes, to outsiders, helicopters scattering dragon fruit seeds over deserts looked like spectacle. But beneath the drama was careful engineering, science, ecology, and politics woven together. Dragon fruit was not chosen at random. Test farms had proven its power: a cactus that thrives in drought, bears fruit for 20 years, and blooms with flowers so large and sweet that bees return to pollinate at night. In a region where pollinators were dying, this fruit could help restore ecosystems while creating new income for farmers. The real challenge was scale. How could a country as vast as Burkina Faso, with limited manpower and scarce resources, turn a small experiment into a nationwide agricultural revolution? The answer came from the skies. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, drawing from his military background, repurposed helicopters once used for border patrols into tools of farming. It was symbolic: the same machines that once defended the nation with weapons would now defend it with seeds. Some generals found the idea eccentric, but to Traoré it was strategy. The rainy season in the Sahel is short, just a few weeks. Planting by hand across thousands of hectares would take months. Helicopters allowed millions of seeds to hit the soil exactly when the rains arrived. Critics dismissed it as wasteful. Random seeding, they argued, would never work. But Traoré countered with simple math: even if only 10% of the seeds survived, tens of thousands of cactus plants would take root. Over time, they would spread naturally, pollinated by bees, reseeding themselves across the land. In a nation with limited manpower, letting nature itself be the farmer was nothing short of genius. But this wasn't just science. It was also politics. By choosing dragon fruit, a crop tied to global luxury markets, Traoré reframed Burkina Faso's image. He wasn't just planting food, he was planting aspiration. Images of farmers harvesting exotic fruit under the Sahel sun told a new story. Burkina Faso was not a victim begging for aid, but a pioneer producing treasures for the world. The psychological impact was immediate. For decades, farmers had been told their land was worthless without foreign fertilizers or imported seeds. The helicopter drops challenged that narrative. "Our soil is not dead," Traoré declared in a national address. "It only needs imagination." Villages began calling the seeds grains of sovereignty. Children collected them eagerly, planting them near their homes and watering them with hope. Whether the fruit grew or not, the belief had already taken root: Burkina Faso could shape its own destiny. And Traoré knew the power of visibility. He invited journalists to film the airdrops live. Drones captured breathtaking footage of black seeds raining down against storm clouds. Social media exploded with captions like, "The day the sky planted hope." Western agencies tried to dismiss it as a stunt, but their criticism only amplified the story. For once, Burkina Faso was setting the narrative, not reacting to it. Behind the spectacle was careful planning. Agricultural scientists had mapped the most promising areas: riverbanks, seasonal wetlands, grazing lands. Ecologists advised on spacing to maintain balance. Local leaders were briefed to rally their communities. Ground teams followed the drops with planting drives, building wooden trellises to help young vines grow. This was not chaos, it was choreography. The geopolitical message was clear. For decades, projects had been imposed from Geneva or Paris, often failing because they ignored local realities. Traore flipped the script. This was Burkinabe-led, Burkinabe-designed, and Burkinabe-owned. Even if it failed, it would fail on their own terms, with dignity. The risks were real. The costs enormous. Foreign embassies mocked it privately. But Traore argued that the greater danger was continuing with the old path, depending on volatile gold exports and fragile food imports. His gamble was not about avoiding risk, but about choosing a risk that built sovereignty instead of dependency. International reaction was split. Some Western headlines sneered, calling it "seeds of madness." But environmental groups praised the bold attempt to fight desertification with cactus crops. Agroecologists highlighted it as a creative response to climate change. In Asia, importers quietly took note. If Burkina Faso could grow dragon fruit at scale, markets in China, Japan, and South Korea would be eager buyers. At home, the story took on a life of its own. Farmers began proudly pointing out new seedlings. Schools taught children how to cultivate dragon fruit. Artists painted murals of helicopters scattering seeds like stars in the sky. Even opposition politicians struggled to criticize the initiative without sounding like they were rooting against national pride. And then, the first signs of success. Green shoots appeared across patches of desert. Strange cactus vines rose on makeshift wooden trellises, their spines glistening under the Sahel sun. In some places, enormous white blossoms opened at night, glowing like lanterns and filling the air with a sweet fragrance. Beekeepers noticed their hives growing heavier. The flowers, blooming when few others did, provided bees with vital nectar. Honey production rose. "These flowers feed not just us," one villager said, "but our companions in the sky." Finally, the first fruits arrived. Small, uneven, but dazzling in the sand, bright pink skins hiding sweet, white flesh speckled with seeds. Curious villagers sliced them open. The taste was refreshing, unlike anything they had eaten before. Children fought over the first slices, their laughter echoing in the desert air. Why did Captain Ibrahim Traoré order helicopters to rain down hundreds of tons of sunflower seeds across the skies of southern and central Burkina Faso? At first glance, it looked like a gamble, almost reckless. But behind it was a bold attempt to rescue the nation's independence. For decades, Burkina Faso depended almost entirely on imported cooking oil. Millions of dollars flowed out of the country each year into the hands of foreign corporations. To many, cooking oil seemed small compared to gold or cotton. But in reality, it was essential, used in every kitchen, every meal, every day. And whenever global prices shifted or shipping routes were disrupted, the effects were immediate. Families rationed food. Street vendors raised prices. Farmers already struggling with poverty felt crushed by rising costs. To Ibrahim, this was more than an economic problem, it was a symbol of unfinished liberation. He asked himself, how can a nation truly be free if it cannot even fry its own food without permission from abroad? His answer was radical: turn the savannas into seas of sunflowers. Sunflowers aren't just beautiful. They produce healthy oil, create protein-rich animal feed, improve soil quality, and even attract tourists. A single crop could strengthen multiple weak points in the economy. But there was a catch. Burkina Faso had no tradition of growing sunflowers on a large scale. The safe option would have been small pilot projects. Traoré rejected that. Instead, he went for shock and scale. He ordered the military to use helicopters, normally reserved for defense, to scatter 150 tons of sunflower seeds over the land. He called it the Fields of Sovereignty. The move stunned his ministers. Why scatter seeds instead of carefully planting? Why risk so much money on an untested crop? But Traore saw the spectacle itself as strategy. The sight of helicopters sowing seeds from the sky would burn into memory a message to every farmer, every citizen, and the entire world. Burkina Faso was planting its independence. And so, from the Ouagadougou airstrip, helicopters lifted into the sky. Not with weapons or soldiers, but with giant sacks of sunflower seeds. The capital buzzed with rumors. Was this a secret military mission? An emergency relief drop? Few could believe what was really happening. A president had turned war machines into farming machines, and with them, he was trying to sow sovereignty itself. As the helicopters thundered across the skies of central Burkina Faso, villagers rushed out of their homes, shielding their eyes from the dust. Then came the shock. The cargo bays opened, and instead of weapons, millions of sunflower seeds rained down like a strange storm. Children laughed, chasing the falling seeds as if it were a festival. Elders whispered prayers. Farmers knelt down, scooping the striped seeds from the soil in disbelief. For them, it was as if the heavens had opened with an unexpected gift. In just a few days, across hundreds of kilometers, the seeds had scattered into fields, ditches, and open farmland. Traore's gamble was underway. And the symbolism was powerful. Helicopters, once seen as machines of war, were now serving farmers. Skies that once brought fear were now delivering life. This was more than farming, it was politics. Normally, seeds are planted carefully in rows, watered, and monitored. But by scattering them from the air, Traore transformed agriculture into theater. His advisors worried it was wasteful, that foreign media would mock it as reckless. And indeed, Western headlines sneered, "Seeds from the sky, Burkina Faso's agricultural circus." Diplomats whispered about wasted resources. But outside the capital, in dusty villages where people struggled daily with hunger, the response was completely different. For the first time, poor farmers felt included in the nation's destiny. One farmer told a journalist, "No president ever gave us tools. This one gave us seeds. He tells us we matter." Villagers began calling the helicopters machines of life. Then nature itself joined the drama. Rain swept across the plains, germinating thousands of seeds. Within weeks, green shoots pierced the soil. By the second month, sunflower stalks were rising strong and tall, proving more resilient than maize or sorghum, surviving even in dry stretches. Agricultural workers confirmed it. Germination rates were higher than expected. Photos of the young sunflower fields spread across social media, turning doubt into cautious curiosity. And then, after 3 months, it happened. The first golden blooms appeared. Villages that had been barren were suddenly glowing with yellow flowers stretching to the horizon. By 6 months, vast seas of gold blanketed the land, a sight unlike anything Burkina Faso had ever seen. Tourists began arriving from neighboring countries just to witness it. Local youths started guiding visitors through the fields, selling photos, even opening small cafes and shops. Bouquets of sunflowers appeared in markets and towns. What began as a desperate gamble for food sovereignty had given birth to something new: hope, pride, and even tourism. For Traore, the blooming fields were vindication. He hadn't just gambled on a crop, he had gambled on a vision. A vision that one bold act could ripple through every corner of society. Yes, there were problems. Many seeds had fallen on rocky soil, on roadsides, or in areas where rain never came. Critics quickly pounced, calling it reckless. Foreign analysts dismissed it as unsustainable without expensive irrigation systems. NGOs warned it could hurt biodiversity. But Traore met these criticisms with calm honesty and sharp wit. On national television he admitted, "Yes, some seeds will not grow. But those that do will feed our people, light our kitchens, and free us from dependency. If 10 million seeds fall and only half survive, that is still 5 million victories." His frankness disarmed opponents. Instead of pretending perfection, he embraced risk and in doing so, inspired his citizens. Behind the scenes, the government moved fast to build on the experiment. Farmers were organized into cooperatives to press oil from harvested seeds. Small-scale oil mills, imported from India and China, were installed in rural towns and run by trained young people. The leftover seed cake went to livestock herders, who quickly noticed their animals growing stronger and producing more milk. Nutritionists celebrated as families began cooking with affordable, locally produced oil. What had started as a rain of seeds from helicopters was now blossoming into a diverse economic ecosystem. Villages pressed oil. Herders fattened cattle. Women's cooperatives sold honey from bees that thrived in the sunflower fields. Entrepreneurs even began experimenting with sunflower-based cosmetics. And slowly, the world took notice. The laughter of skeptics turned to unease. Neighboring West African nations began considering their own sunflower revolutions. Global vegetable oil traders, once confident in their control, started to worry about competition from a country they had long dismissed. Burkina Faso, once an importer, now threatened to become a supplier. Western diplomats who once mocked the project quietly returned, offering technical assistance. But Traore, with his trademark smile, declined most offers. "We do not need experts to tell us how to grow flowers," he quipped. The message was clear: Burkina Faso would chart its own path. As the golden fields spread across the land, so too did pride. Poets wrote verses about the golden army of Traore. Musicians composed songs celebrating the flower that fed both stomachs and souls. Painters captured the sunflower fields as symbols of renewal. Children who once saw only dust now grew up surrounded by seas of color, asking their parents why this had never happened before. The sunflower had become more than a crop. It was a symbol of defiance, dignity, and hope. And that was Traore's true genius. He had taken a simple seed and turned it into a story. A story that gave power to a nation. By the second year, what had begun as a shocking spectacle of helicopters scattering seeds had become something enduring, an agricultural transformation visible in the fields, and measurable in the economy. Fields that were once barren under the burning Sahel sun had transformed into seas of yellow sunflowers stretching beyond the horizon, shimmering like rivers of gold. The sight alone lifted national morale. But it wasn't just beauty that mattered, it was results. Within 2 years, Burkina Faso's Ministry of Agriculture reported a sharp rise in domestic vegetable oil production. Local mills were pressing sunflower seeds into oil, bottled under the brand name Weso, and lining market shelves that had once been stocked only with imports. Housewives immediately noticed the difference. This oil was nearly half the price of imported brands, fresher, and always available. Vendors, once frustrated by unstable supply, now sold with pride, telling customers, "This is ours, grown from our soil, born from our skies." Soon, a new slogan spread through markets and political speeches alike: oil of sovereignty. Independence could now be poured straight into a frying pan. But the impact went far beyond the kitchen. The leftover seed cake from oil pressing, rich in protein, proved a game-changer for herders. Traditionally, cattle and goats survived on poor grazing, producing little milk and tough meat. But with seed cake in their diet, animals grew stronger, milk production rose, and meat quality improved. Pastoralists who had once struggled at the margins now found themselves in demand as traders competed for healthier livestock. What began as a solution to cooking oil dependency had sparked a livestock revolution, raising incomes, improving nutrition, and transforming rural life. Economists called it a multiplier effect. Villagers called it something simpler: life was getting better. The land itself began to heal. Sunflowers, with their deep roots, stabilized fragile soils, reduced erosion, and restored fertility. Farmers who planted millet and sorghum alongside them noticed higher yields. Scientists confirmed it: the sunflowers were not only feeding people but revitalizing the earth, acting as a natural defense against desertification. Traore seized on this message. At a rally he declared, "They told us the desert would win. But we have planted gold, gold that feeds both our people and our land." The crowd erupted, chanting Solio Faso, the son of Faso. A new patriotic phrase was born. And beyond agriculture, something unexpected happened. Those golden fields became destinations of their own. Tourists began arriving to witness the breathtaking landscapes, turning a political gamble into not just food security, but culture, pride, and even a new stream of income. Burkina Faso had planted more than sunflowers. It had planted sovereignty. In the heart of Ouagadougou, where desert winds sweep dust across the city's edge, stood a mountain no one knew what to do with: 12 million old car tires. For years, they were nothing but an ugly scar on the landscape. Towers of black rubber stacked in chaos, leaking chemicals into the soil and turning into breeding grounds for mosquitoes and disease. Most people saw trash. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré saw opportunity. Burkina Faso, a landlocked country of 22 million people, has battled food insecurity for decades. Farmers struggled against dry land, weak irrigation, and the harsh desert climate. As a result, the nation relied heavily on onion imports from Niger, Ivory Coast, and even Europe, paying high prices while local youth remained jobless. Yet onions are one of the most essential ingredients in African cooking. Traore realized the answer was right in front of him, those very tires that everyone wanted to throw away. Food inflation had quietly turned into a weapon, stripping people of their dignity one meal at a time. But Ibrahim Traoré was not an ordinary president. At only 34 years old, he had proven himself as more than a soldier, he was a strategist. He understood that true power wasn't just in carrying weapons, but in giving people hope for tomorrow. And in the middle of Burkina Faso's struggle, he saw what no one else did: onions, growing inside old car tires. The idea sounded strange at first, almost laughable. When Traoré first brought it up, his advisors looked stunned. Some chuckled, some shook their heads. Tires and onions? How could a nation's food security rest on something so unusual? But Traoré was dead serious. He had already studied it. When old tires are packed with soil and stacked together, they transform into mini planting beds. They hold water longer than regular fields, protect crops from the desert winds, and stop precious soil from being washed away. What others saw as waste, he saw as a weapon against hunger. In places like Cuba and parts of Asia, small experimental farms had already shown that crops could thrive in old tires. But Ibrahim Traoré wanted to take that small idea and scale it up, not in the thousands, but in the millions. It was a bold gamble. The first pilot project began in Bobo-Dioulasso, Burkina Faso's second-largest city. Rows of discarded tires were cut, stacked, and filled with enriched soil. Farmers planted red and white onion seeds, watered them with drip systems that reused wastewater, and waited. The results shocked everyone. The onions grew bigger, greener, and healthier than those in open fields. Yield shot up by nearly 40%. Water use dropped by half. And pests? They could hardly touch the crops. Word spread quickly. Villagers who once laughed at the idea started hunting for old tires. Workshops were set up to teach communities how to cut, stack, and prepare them. Soon, entire neighborhoods smelled of fresh onion greens. Mothers sold baskets of onions in the markets, children watered the tire gardens, and jobless youth suddenly found new work. What was once a mountain of waste now became a symbol of rebirth. But for Traoré, this wasn't just about symbolism, it was strategy. He thought like a commander preparing for battle. One onion is not just one onion, he told his ministers. It is food. It is income. It is dignity. And if we have enough onions, we gain leverage. Leverage, that was the key. In West Africa, onions are more than an ingredient, they are currency. Every day, millions use them in soups, stews, and sauces. Prices swing wildly depending on imports. Traoré understood that if Burkina Faso could produce enough high-quality onions, it could not only feed its people but also dominate the regional market. By mid-2025, the results were astonishing. What started with 50,000 tires had grown into 12 million. The government even began buying waste tires from citizens for a small fee, turning trash collection into extra income. Farmers were given seeds and training, and soon onions that once cost 800 CFA per kilo dropped to just 300. In the markets of Ouagadougou, traders from Ghana and Ivory Coast lined up to load trucks full of Burkinabe onions. For the first time in years, Burkina Faso had a surplus hundreds of thousands of tons each season. What many once mocked as a bizarre gamble had become a national triumph. The economy, once struggling, now carried the fresh scent of onions. Global media couldn't ignore it. Headlines in Paris, London, and Washington declared, "Burkina Faso's onion revolution, from trash to treasure." Some analysts called it agricultural populism. Others, a stroke of genius. For Ibrahim Traoré, it was both. A shield and a sword. A shield, because food security meant fewer riots, less dependence on foreign aid, and stronger loyalty from his people. A sword, because exporting onions brought in hard currency, dollars and euros that could be used to fund bigger ambitions, including his controversial military modernization. Even China took notice, sending delegations to study Burkina Faso's onion tire farms. Western economists, though skeptical at first, were forced to admit it. Burkina Faso had achieved something unexpected. It had turned garbage into food security. But Traoré always played the long game. To him, onions were never just onions. They were about psychology, politics, and strategy. At rallies, he framed the project as the people's victory. These onions are yours. You planted them. You harvested them. And now, the world will taste the strength of Burkina Faso. In truth, it was his vision, his gamble, and his stubbornness that transformed ridicule into triumph. He had turned tires into tools, waste into wealth, and onions into symbols of sovereignty. Yet, questions lingered. Could this model be scaled across the Sahel, where millions of hectares of desert sat unused? Could other crops, tomatoes, peppers, even medicinal herbs, grow the same way? Was this just the beginning of a larger African agricultural revolution? For Traoré, the answer was simple. Today, it is onions, he whispered to his closest aides. Tomorrow, it will be the desert itself that we conquer. Under the blazing Sahel sun, the world had laughed at the idea that discarded tires could be the foundation of a nation's agriculture. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré pressed forward, laying the foundation of what history would later call the Onion Revolution. To most, 12 million waste tires scattered across Burkina Faso were nothing but a toxic burden, black rings of rubber that trapped rainwater, bred mosquitoes, and poisoned the land when set on fire. But Traoré saw something different. To him, they were self-contained planting beds, perfectly suited for a semi-arid country desperate to preserve water. His logic was simple but brilliant. Why beg the world for aid when the solution was already littering the streets? In the second phase of his gamble, the government passed a decree. Every tire collected by municipalities, garages, and villages would no longer be destroyed. Instead, they would be stored in vast, green warehouses. By mid-year, entire hangars in Ouagadougou, Kédougou, and Bobo Dioulasso were stacked wall-to-wall with old tires, guarded like they were reserves of oil or gold. At first, farmers laughed, who plants onions in rubber? But then came the pilot projects. Agronomists filled the tires with a special soil mix, half desert sand, half compost from food waste. The results stunned everyone. The tires locked in moisture like natural wells. Onions sprouted faster, resisted pests, and needed 60% less water than traditional fields. In villages where dry winds normally scorched young seedlings, tire gardens stood like miniature fortresses. And politically, Traoré had pulled off a masterstroke. He silenced critics who accused him of focusing only on military defense by unveiling a civilian project of equal audacity. He answered the problem of youth unemployment by ordering every district to form cooperatives, groups of young people who would collect, clean, and prepare the tires. Thousands of young men and women, who might have drifted toward illegal migration or gangs, suddenly found themselves earning wages by building tire farms. This was more than food, it was national mobilization. The impact was immediate. International media reacted with a mix of shock and disbelief. Western outlets wrote headlines like, "The poorest nation in West Africa turns trash into onions." Meanwhile, Chinese and Indian agricultural experts quietly sent teams to study the model, wondering if it could be adapted to their own dry regions. In neighboring capitals like Niamey and Bamako, leaders were unsettled. How could Burkina Faso, under sanctions and constant financial pressure, suddenly export onions by the ton? Within just a year, convoys of trucks filled with purple onions were crossing borders into Ghana, Ivory Coast, and Senegal. Prices stabilized, inflation eased, and for the first time in history, the Sahel, a region once mocked as the land of famine, was setting the terms of onion trade. But beneath the headlines, Traoré's strategy was even deeper. By using tires, he reduced the need for expensive imported fertilizers and irrigation systems. He turned a waste crisis into a food revolution. Every tire bed represented sovereignty, food grown without foreign chemicals, jobs created without foreign loans. And he linked it to a powerful national story. If we can grow onions in the desert, why not tomatoes, peppers, or even medicinal plants? Diplomatically, onions became sharper than any weapon. When European envoys lectured him about democracy or aid, Traoré pointed to overflowing markets, to statistics showing food security rising, and to photos of women and children working tire farms instead of waiting in line for foreign handouts. It was nearly impossible to argue against a leader who had fed his people with their own discarded waste. Of course, challenges came. Transport bottlenecks, soil fatigue, even black markets for hoarding tires. But Traoré anticipated each problem. He introduced a national barcoding system so every tire bed could be tracked. He signed state contracts with cooperatives to stabilize onion prices. He invested in solar-powered dehydrators so surplus onions could be preserved and sold off-season. Slowly, what began as a gamble was transforming into an industry. To outsiders, it looked like a miracle. To Traoré, it was ruthless pragmatism. And the people felt it too. If onions could bloom in rubber, then maybe Burkina Faso itself could bloom in adversity. At first, the idea seemed bizarre. In the dusty streets of Ouagadougou, many whispered that their president was gambling scarce resources on a crazy experiment, growing onions inside old tires. Yet, within 2 harvests, critics fell silent. The tires created a protected microenvironment, they retained water, shielded roots from the burning sun, and even blocked pests. With minimal water, onions sprouted strong and resilient. Farmers who once struggled to coax out a few kilos from the sandy soil were suddenly harvesting baskets of fat, healthy onions.